Every so often, the news sends a famous man to a place I know from the inside, and the whole country suddenly wants to know the same thing. What is it like for him in there? Right now, it is Sean Combs, the man they call Diddy, held in a federal jail in Brooklyn through his case and then sent on to serve his time, a jail that has been in the news for years for bad conditions, lockdowns, staffing so thin the building could barely run. I am going to say something at the very top, and I need you to hear it plainly because it is the honest ground this whole video stands on. I never met that man. I do not know his cell, his day, his treatment, and I am not going to pretend to. And anybody who tells you exactly how a specific famous prisoner is living right now from the outside is guessing or lying. But I did 12 years, and in 12 years I did share a system with men like him, the wealthy, the famous, the notorious, the ones whose names the whole yard knew before they arrived. And I watched what a prison does with a man like that, and I watched the two opposite forces that pull on him from the first hour. Because a high-profile man walks in carrying two things at once, and they point in opposite directions. One of them can get him hurt. The other can build him a wall. Tonight, I am going to show you both, honestly, the part that is real and the part people get wrong from a man who stood a few feet from it instead of reading about it. Let me set the ground the way I always do. One man, one state, 12 years, and the famous and wealthy men I crossed paths with were a handful across all that time. So I am telling you patterns I saw, not a law of nature, and the federal system where the biggest names usually land runs differently than my state ever did. And I am not here to try anybody's case in a YouTube video, not the man in the news, not anyone. Guilt and innocence are for courts, and I have opinions I keep to myself. What I can tell you about is the machine, how a prison actually handles a man the whole world is watching, and that is a thing I saw with my own eyes more than once. And clear the movie version away first, because on this subject the whole world runs on movies. Film gives you two rich inmate fantasies and nothing in between. One is the kingpin who runs the prison from his cell, guards on his payroll, a phone in his hand, luxuries smuggled in, ruling the block like a boss. The other is the fallen celebrity getting his comeuppance, humbled and brutalized, finally learning what the rest of us know. Both are stories the outside tells itself because they are satisfying. One feeds our outrage and one feeds our sense of justice, and both are mostly wrong. What I actually watched was quieter, stranger, and more human than either. A man carrying advantages that were real and a vulnerability that was also real, living a version of prison that was genuinely different from mine, and yet, underneath, subject to the exact same clock. If you came here for either fantasy, I am going to disappoint you, and I think the truth is worth more than either one. Start with the force that can get him hurt, because it comes first and it surprises people. The first thing that happens to a famous man inside is that everyone knows who he is and what he is charged with. Instantly, completely, in a way that never happens to the rest of us. I have told you a prison is a small town with no privacy and a memory like a courthouse. Now put a man in that town whose face was on every screen in the country for months, whose charges were argued on the news every night, and understand that he arrives with no first chapter, no chance to be quiet and watch and learn the room the way I have taught you every new man must. His whole story walked in the door ahead of him. And here is the hard part, the part the money cannot touch. Certain charges are treated a specific way by the population inside, and it does not matter how rich or famous you are, it can matter more. There is a hierarchy of offenses inside that the outside world does not fully grasp. An unofficial one, brutal and old, and men accused of certain things, crimes against women, crimes against children, anything the yard reads as preying on the vulnerable, sit at the very bottom of it, and the yard polices that hierarchy itself viciously, whatever the staff do or do not do. So a famous man whose charges fall into one of those categories does not walk in as a celebrity. He walks in as a target with a spotlight on him, known to everyone, exposed to everyone, and the fame that would protect him anywhere else in the world becomes, in that town, the thing that paints him. That is the first truth, and it is why so many high-profile men end up where I am about to take you next. Not in luxury, but behind a different kind of door. I want to give you the shape of how the population learns a famous man's story, because it explains why he can never do what I have taught every new man to do. The ordinary new arrival gets a grace period, small but real, a stretch of days where nobody knows his charges, and he can be quiet and watchful and earn a first impression with his conduct. The way I have told you, the file gets written one unposed act at a time. The famous man gets no such period. His file is already written by the news before he sets foot in the building, and it is the most public file in the place. Men who never met him have opinions about him. Men repeat what they saw on television as if they witnessed it. He cannot introduce himself because he has already been introduced loudly to everyone by strangers, and there is no correcting a story that arrived before you did. I have told you your reputation inside is the only identity you have. The famous man is the one prisoner who does not get to write his own, and that stolen authorship, more than anything money can fix, is the first real weight of walking in known. Let me take you back to the arrival, because a famous man's first day is nothing like the first day I have described to you before, and the difference tells you everything. I have walked you through intake, the property bag, the shower, the mattress, the anonymous terror of being no one in a place full of strangers. The famous man gets the opposite terror. He is not no one. He is the most known man in the building before he clears processing, and word runs ahead of him down every tier the way fire runs along a fuse. He is here. He is on this unit. Did you see who came in? The whole town I have told you about, the 500 men with a memory like a courthouse, has already convened its jury on him, and it reached its verdict from television months ago. And that creates a thing the ordinary man never has to manage, which is that part of everyone wants something from his presence. Some want to say they were near him. Some want to test him to make their own name off his. Some want to be his friend for reasons that have nothing to do with friendship and everything to do with what a famous, wealthy man is worth. I have taught you that a new man must watch and stay quiet and give the room little to read. The famous man cannot do a single part of that because the room is watching him, the room already read him, and the room has decided he is worth approaching. His first day is not about learning the yard. It is about surviving the fact that the yard has been waiting for him. And there is a second thing about that arrival that the money cannot fix, and I want to be careful and exact about it because it is the hinge the whole first half of this turns on. A man's charges inside are not private, and they are not neutral. The population finds them out always, through the news, through the paperwork that travels, through men who make it their business to know. And once they are known, they place a man on that old brutal hierarchy, and no amount of money moves him up it. In fact, the fame does the opposite, because the fame guarantees that everyone knows precisely what he is charged with, in detail, argued nightly on every screen, so he never gets the small mercy the anonymous man sometimes gets, which is that most people simply do not know or care what he is in for. The famous man is the one prisoner whose charges are common knowledge to every single person he will ever pass in a hallway. And if those charges are the kind the yard treats as the worst kind, then the fame and the charge combine into the most dangerous possible arrival, total exposure attached to the most policed accusation. And that combination, not luxury, is the real reason the institution so often has no choice but to pull a man like that out of the general population entirely before something happens to him. The wall goes up not because he is pampered, the wall goes up because without it he might not survive the week. Because the institution knows all of this, and the institution has a tool for it, and the tool is the first thing money and status actually change. It is called protective custody. When a man is too well known, too hated, too targeted to be safe in general population, the prison separates him, houses him apart, away from the crowd that might hurt him. And people hear protective custody and picture a favor, a soft option, a VIP suite. Let me correct that hard, because it is one of the biggest misunderstandings about how the famous do time. Protective custody, in a lot of places, looks a great deal like solitary. A single cell, most of the day locked in it, cut off from the programs, the yard, the crowd, the ordinary movement that makes a sentence survivable. I did 90 days in isolation, and I have told you what that room does to a mind. Now understand that a famous man kept safe may be kept safe inside conditions not far from the ones I barely survived for far longer than 90 days, precisely because he is too exposed to be anywhere else. So the first thing his status buys him is not a party. It is a locked door that keeps the danger out and keeps almost everything else out with it. Safer, yes. Softer, no. That is the trade the outside never sees, and it is the honest beginning of the money conversation, because the very first thing status does is buy a man a safety that is also a second cage. Now, the other force, the one everybody actually clicked to hear about, the wall that money builds, and I am going to give it to you straight, the real parts and the exaggerated parts, because the truth is more interesting than the myth and more honest than the outrage. Here is what money genuinely does inside, what I watched with my own eyes. It buys commissary without limit up to the cap, which sounds small until you have lived where a man's whole comfort, his food, his hygiene, his little peace runs through that account, and a man who never worries about it lives a materially different day than a man who counts every soup. It buys communication, the phone time, the messaging, the lawyers visiting under legal rules that ordinary visits do not get, which means a wealthy man is never as cut off, never as alone, never as forgotten as the poor man 3 cells down whose family cannot afford the calls. It buys the best legal firepower in the country, and this is the biggest one in the one people undercount, because that legal team does not stop working when the trial ends. It keeps fighting his conditions, his placement, his treatment, filing, complaining, putting the institution on notice that this prisoner has eyes on him, and a prison behaves differently toward a man whose lawyers will document every bruise. And it buys attention itself, the press, the public, the pressure, which is a kind of currency inside that no commissary sells, because an institution that mistreats a nobody hears nothing, and an institution that mistreats a famous man reads about it in the paper. That is real. All of that is real, and it adds up to a genuinely different sentence, and I am not going to insult you by pretending it does not. And let me sit longer on the legal firepower, because it is the piece people most underestimate, and it is where the real inequality lives. When I say a wealthy man's lawyers keep working after the trial, I do not mean they file a form now and then. I mean he has, on the outside, a full-time apparatus whose entire job is his comfort and his freedom, people watching his case, his conditions, his placement, his health, ready to make a phone call or a filing or a headline the instant anything goes wrong. Think about what that means from inside a building that runs on the assumption that no one is watching. Most men in there have no one checking. Their grievances vanish into a slow system. Their complaints go nowhere. Their bad treatment is invisible, because invisibility is the default condition of the poor and the anonymous inside. The wealthy man has broken the default. He is watched from the outside by people with the resources to make watching count, and a prison treats a watched man differently than an unwatched one, not out of kindness but out of self-protection. That is the deepest thing money buys inside. Not luxury, visibility. The one thing the institution most relies on, a prisoner no one is paying attention to, is the one thing his money has taken off the table. And that advantage compounds backward through the whole case, because the same resources that hire the watchers hired the trial lawyers, and those lawyers shaped the charges and the plea and the sentence and the placement. Every fork in the road where money quietly bought the better branch long before the cell door ever closed. By the time a wealthy man is standing in a prison at all, money has already bent the shape of his sentence a dozen times in rooms the rest of us never get invited into. Let me give you a scene, a composite one, protecting everyone in it, because I did share time with wealth more than once, and the pattern held. There was a man on a unit with me who had money. Real money, the outside kind, and you would not have known it from his cell, because the institution issues the same bunk to a millionaire as to a pauper. Where you saw it was in the margins. His commissary never ran dry. His legal visits came often, lawyers in good suits who treated the staff with the easy confidence of people who write letters that get read. When something on the unit went wrong that touched him, it got looked into a little faster, documented a little more carefully, because everyone handling it knew there was a paper trail with expensive names on it. He was not louder than anyone, did not throw the money around. The smart ones never do. I have taught you that displaying possessions inside is how you attract the wrong attention. He simply existed inside a quiet cushion the rest of us did not have, a cushion made of resources, and the cushion was invisible until you knew to look for it, and then you saw it in 100 small places every single day. That is what wealth mostly looks like inside, not a party. A cushion in the margins that softens every ordinary hardship the rest of us took at full force. But now let me walk up the chain the way people imagine it, because this is where the myth and the truth separate, and I want to be careful and honest at every step. The story people believe is that a rich man simply buys the whole system, hands cash to a guard, hands more to a warden, and buys himself a comfortable stay right up the ladder. And I have to tell you what I actually saw, which is more complicated and in some ways worse. At the lowest level, yes, there is an economy inside, and where there is scarcity and low pay and human beings, there is corruption, and the federal watchdogs have documented staff misconduct in these buildings for years. I have never once pretended that building was clean. A wealthy man has more to offer that economy than a poor man does. That is just true. But here is the part the myth gets wrong. The higher you go, the less it works like a bag of cash, and the more it works like something quieter and more legal and harder to fight. A warden is not usually bought with money. A warden is moved by pressure, by a man whose lawyers and whose public and whose politicians can make that warden's life difficult. And that is not a bribe. That is leverage, and leverage is exactly the thing wealth and fame produce for free. The rich man's real power over the people above the guards is not an envelope. It is that he is dangerous to mistreat. And go one level higher, above the wardens, to the places the user in me wants to point at. And the truth gets quieter still, because up there it stops looking like corruption at all and starts looking like the ordinary machinery of advantage that runs the whole free world too. The best lawyers get the better facility. The public pressure gets the transfer. The money that hired the experts shapes the sentence itself long before the man ever sees a cell. It is not a crooked warden taking cash in a back room. It is a system that has always, at every level, treated the man with resources differently than the man without them, and prison is just the place where that difference stops being hidden and becomes a locked door you can see. There is a piece of this that cuts the other way, and honesty requires me to give it to you, because the money and fame story is not all advantage. Sometimes a famous man is treated harder, not softer, and for a reason that surprises people. An institution terrified of being accused of favoritism can overcorrect, enforcing every rule on the famous man to the letter, denying him the small, ordinary mercies of discretion that the anonymous man gets without noticing, precisely so that no one can ever say he got a break. I have watched it. The staff who would let a nobody slide on a small thing will write the famous man up for it, because his ticket is safe and a nobody's grievance is not, and because nobody ever got in trouble for being too strict with a celebrity. So the same visibility that pressures the institution to protect him can also pressure it to make an example of him, and which way it breaks depends on the place, the people, and the politics of the moment. The fame is not simply a shield. It is a spotlight, and a spotlight makes a man both safer and more scrutinized at once, and he does not get to choose which. Now, can the money buy protection directly from the other prisoners, the way people picture it, a rich man simply paying men to keep him safe on the tier? I watched enough to tell you the truth, and the truth is a warning. It can a little, and it is one of the most dangerous things a wealthy man can try. Because the moment a man is known to pay for safety, he has told the whole population that he is a source of money, and I have taught you across every video what that does, how a man who can be paid from becomes a man who will be pressured indebted, leaned on, and eventually owned. Protection bought from prisoners is not protection, it is a subscription with no cancellation, and the price only ever climbs because a man who cannot stop paying without losing his safety is a man you can charge anything. I watched wealth make a man a target on the tier as often as it made him safe, because to the predators I warned you about, a rich man is not a person, he is a resource, the biggest honey bun in the building. The smart, wealthy men did the opposite of what people imagine. They kept their money quiet, spent it on the cushion in the margins and the lawyers on the outside, and bought their actual safety from the institution through protective custody rather than from the population through payment, because safety bought from other prisoners is the fastest way to be devoured by them. The wall that protects a famous man is built by the state, not by the yard. The yard does not sell protection. It sells the beginning of a debt. So let me put the two forces together, because that is the real answer to what it is like for a man like that. He is more exposed than any of us and more protected than any of us at the same time. And both of those are extreme. The fame that endangers him in the yard is the same fame that shields him from the staff. The charges that make him a target from the population make the institution wrap him in a protective custody that is safer and lonelier than anything the rest of us do. The money that cannot buy him a friend on the tier buys him the lawyers who keep the whole building honest about how it treats him. He is living, in a way, the most extreme version of every truth I have ever taught you on this channel. The exposure, the isolation, the way money bends everything, the way certain charges follow a man. All of it turned all the way up because the whole world is watching. That is what is different about the famous man. Not that the rules do not apply to him, that every rule applies to him harder in both directions at once. Now the honest limits, and they matter more here than anywhere. Everything I have described I saw in my system, in my years, and the very high-profile federal cases, the ones on the news, run in places and at a level I only glimpsed. I am giving you the shape of a thing, not the inside of any one man's cell. And I will say again clearly that I do not know how the man in today's headlines is actually living, and neither does anyone speaking from outside those walls. And here is the deepest honesty, the thing I most want you to take. None of what money buys touches the center of the thing. I have watched wealthy men in that building, safer than me, better fed than me, better lawyered than me, and I have watched the same clock take from them exactly what it took from all of us. The money buys a softer cell. It does not buy back the years. It does not buy the child's birthday, the parent's funeral, the ordinary morning of freedom, the child grown up in the meantime. It cannot make the count not come, cannot make the door open a day early, cannot fill the specific silence of a man who has everything except the one thing the place takes from everyone equally, which is time and choice and being there. I sat with that truth for 12 years watching men with fortunes learn it, and it is the one democratic thing about that whole unequal building. The gate is the same distance away for the rich man as for the poor one. He just waits for it in a nicer room. I want your thoughts on this one, and I want them thoughtful, because it is an easy topic to get loud about and a hard one to get right. If you have done time alongside a wealthy or a famous man, what did you actually see? The real version, not the rumor. If you worked in corrections, you watched this from the other side, and I would honestly value knowing where I have it right and where I have it wrong. And for everyone else, here is the real question under the clickbait. If money buys a softer sentence, and it does, what does that tell us about the sentence we hand everyone else? Sit with that one. No case arguments about any specific person in the comments. No names beyond what is already public. Keep it about the machine. Next time I am going to come back down to the ordinary man, the one with no fame and no fortune, and finally give you the video I keep promising about the warm table, the commissary and the spread, and how men with almost nothing build comfort out of almost nothing, because that, and not the famous man's cell, is where the real ingenuity of that place lives. I will end where I started, with the honest thing. People want the story of the famous man in prison to be one of two fantasies. Either he suffers exactly like everyone else, finally equal, or he lounges in luxury while the rest rot, finally exposed. The truth I saw was neither, and it was stranger and sadder than both. A famous man inside is the most watched and the most alone, the most protected and the most exposed. A man money has wrapped in every comfort and cannot save from the one thing the place exists to take. I do not know how the man in the news tonight is living, but I know the machine that holds him, and I know what it does to everyone it holds, rich and poor, watched and forgotten, and I know the one place they all end up equal, standing at a door, waiting for it to open, counting a time that no amount of money has ever once made shorter. That is the part no fortune has ever bought its way out of. I watched the richest men in that building learn it the same way I did, one long day at a time.